Well, hello and welcome back to Read Becca. It is time once again for my weekly chatty catch up on everything I've read, everything I'm currently reading, and everything I'm looking forward to reading, as well as some general chit chat and lifey catch up. And I apologize if there is some yelling in the background. There is a cat in here who is my new foster, and she is a very yelly cat. We swapped out fosters this week, and I got a new one who's so ridiculously sweet. But she does like to yell at me for not giving her constant attention. So you may or may not hear her. And there she goes. Anyway, so let's talk about books first. The first book that I read this week was a science fiction continuation in a series that I'm really enjoying. The Record of a Spaceborn Few, the third in the Wayfarers series by Becky Chambers. And I'm loving that the series is really different in each book. I think the second book was my favorite purely because we got to really deep dive into two characters, and that was where the focus was entirely on the identities of these two characters. Where book 3 jumps in, we have a slight connection back to book 1, but it is mostly encapsulated. Each of these books have sort of stood on their own. This one is interesting because the format is in parts, and you basically get every character perspective in every part. So you're running through all of the characters in every part. And that's really useful and interesting, and we get a really wide variety of perspectives, both from within a society and from outside of a society, approaching it with sort of unknowns and a sense of wonder for the strange and different. So the society that we're talking about, or the place that we're talking about, is the Exodent Fleet. And this sort of is a contrived habitat, I would say. So it's not a planet. It's not some place where they have a lot of resources available to them. So they're in this very limited, hyper-sustainable environment where they have to be conscious all the time of the fact that they have to make use of everything. They are within a closed circuit, more or less. And so people within versus out have really different perspectives. People who have lived on a planet think very differently from how these people within the fleet think. And we're getting everything from family perspectives and how they approach that to people who are older and thinking about education, thinking about generally life and death in this type of society is a really big discussion point, because we do actually have someone who is kind of the caretaker, I would say, for the people as they're passing. And so I feel like you get into a lot of philosophical discussions, but you're aiming at those through the practicalities of the world. And I love that aspect. It feels very like anthropology and sociology all combined together. And it's really, really great the way that Chambers does that, and does kind of a deep dive into world building in all of her books, where she very much thinks about the human impacts to the way that a world is built. And that's really what the Wayfarer series is, or really all of Chambers' books, I think, take that approach. So I've very much enjoyed this series for that. I think this hit me really hard because there were some real emotional moments, for sure. And I think that it also had connections with characters much more, I think, than the first book did for me. So this one was really, really top-notch, but not quite to the level that book 2 was. Fantastic, and I'm so excited to continue on to the 4th book. Then I read Of Monsters and Mainframes by Barbara Truelove. And this is a strange sort of sci-fi horror, maybe psychological thriller book that I picked up because I know several people who have read it, but I think mainly Kim from An Oasis of Books had it on her favorites last year. And so I knew I wanted to get to it. And it's on Hoopla, available for the audio. I will say the audio I feel a little mixed about, because the audio narration was actually really good and very unique for each character, but I found every one of the humans, or really all of the non-AI perspectives, to be really gratingly annoying most of the time. I really struggled with the voices that were chosen, or the tones that were chosen. Did not work for me, but they were like well acted, I think. Anyway, so not on the audio, but the actual story. This is such an interesting story because it kind of feels like that isolated in space, and things are going wrong and people are getting increasingly paranoid, but we're with AIs. We're with specifically Demeter, who is a ship's AI. And then we're talking to a lot of other auxiliary processes and supplementary software within the ship for the most part. We get a lot of different communications over time because this takes place over a very long period of time because it is a ship's AI that sometimes just gets shut off for long periods and then gets turned back on and realizes it's been a decade, you know? And so that sense of time being really strange is really interesting. But the main thrust that I can say without getting into spoilery territory for this one is that the ship's AI starts recognizing that things in their database and things they're recording even seem to be going a little bit wrong. And they don't know if those things that are wrong are because they're being tampered with or if those really wrong things are actually happening. And very specifically to the title, there are monsters showing up. And so it's kind of a question. Are these monsters actually there, or are they in some way being inserted, being edited? Okay, we had some yelly cat needs, sorry. I think I was saying that basically the ship's computer's AI, their recordings feel like they're being tampered with, or they're showing things that are unusual. Those may or may not be actual monsters. It might be that the monsters are there to cover something up. And so I feel like you do get answers to all of that over long periods of time. But what is so wonderful, I think, is the inhuman element, the fact that we have both the idea of these monsters and the idea of ships' AIs and the ways that humans perceive them, and the way that the AIs kind of can get around human programming is so interesting. So yeah, I really enjoyed it, and it is very thrillery, so I feel like it's one that you kind of want to go in fairly blind. I don't want to really say more than that, other than that the time scale is very, very long, and it's very fast-paced, I would say, despite there not being a lot of action, because it is just sort of these AIs talking to each other for the most part. But I think that was very, very successful. It has a real Murderbot vibe. I think if you enjoy Murderbot, you probably will enjoy Of Monsters and Mainframes. I do think, for me, it went on a little long. The audio is like 12 hours, and I feel like keeping it edited and tighter because the time scale is so long would have really helped. But I still think it was great and so entertaining the whole way through, really. It just had some spots where I felt like it could have been tightened up. And I really loved the characters. Despite them being AIs, I so connected with many of the characters. So anyway, lastly, and this is going to be very hard because we have a cat, Blood and Iron by Katja, The Rise and Fall of the German Empire, 1871 to 1918. And I'm not going to hold that up, I'll put it on the screen. So this was really interesting nonfiction. And also it was very, for me, I think, uneven. It's not super long. It's pretty short. It's, I think, under 300 pages. And I think that what I was looking for in this book was more of a human story of the rise of Otto von Bismarck and Kaiser Wilhelm specifically. And it wasn't really that. So especially because of the format of this, it's broken down into time periods, and those are not uniform. So like the last one during World War I is 1914 to 18, and that's the shortest, I think. And some are much longer time ranges, like the rise or the upbringing even of Otto von Bismarck is much longer. And I felt like that was fine, but what it meant is that we were going through the time period repeatedly from different perspectives or on different topics, really. So like that last time period, 1914 to 18, we kept repeating going through those years, talking about what's going on economically, what's going on with trench warfare, what's going on with conflicts between religious groups, things like that, where it felt sort of strange the way that was playing out. And I can see why that was done, but I don't know that it delivered what I exactly was looking for. It was very informative, and I think that was so useful for me because I didn't know anything about this period at all in Prussia and German Empire history. The coming together, the different conflicts and battles, the social moves, I think, were what I most took away. And specifically, things that feel like they hit close to home in the US right now. I knew there was a lot of similarity during this period with things that are happening right in this moment in the US. And very specifically, you can see real extremes, I think, is the main thing that was thematic, where we had real extreme conflict between Catholic and Protestants in the religious space, but then also a real rise of secularism. And in part because of that rise in conflict between Catholic and Protestants. And that's really fascinating and also very linear to what we have going on in the US. We saw real income disparity, or a real difference in economic success between people. And even it talked about an agrarian society that existed during this time in the late 1800s going into the 1900s, where effectively like aristocrats were actually benefiting so much more from this agrarian society, not the small farmers, and they were really struggling and angry. They were seeing technological advances that were rising so quickly during this boom period, and yet workers were being sort of shunted to the background, and it was viewed as a threat to those in power that workers were working less and having more leisure time, and maybe they had time to get informed and have opinions about things rather than working. And so that was upsetting hierarchy and power structures that existed. That was very fascinating. I think that for me, this informed me on so many different areas that I felt I could see and make connections with in reality now that I don't think I would have in the past. So that was helpful, but it felt very dense in how informative it was, and some things I just didn't connect with, and I didn't get that human story that I was looking for, where I really wanted to have more of that. I don't feel like I connected with von Bismarck as a person very well in a way that I'm going to remember significantly. There were some really incredible moments, things that did stick out, like this moment that I now would draw a connection to Pete Hegseth, who's currently he's the Secretary of Defense in the US, but he's very much a chauvinistic, strong man who really makes a show out of power. And there was this moment with Kaiser Wilhelm, who made a speech in, I think, 1900, going after the Boxer Rebellion in China, and basically said some things that were exactly in line with speeches that we've had from Hegseth, where it was about giving no quarter and making these very strong, saber-rattling gestures. And those turned off public sentiment really to an extreme in that time, because he just completely misgauged the sentiment of the public and was out of step with it in his strong-arm tactics. And that feels very of this moment. We're seeing a lot of that, where we have these real swings in public sentiment versus political sentiment or political power. And at the moment, it feels like that's playing out really similarly. So I kept finding those similarities, and those were the things that I think are going to stick with me. But I think that there was just so much here that it did feel like reading history rather than something that I really could connect with entirely. And this cat is being very distracting. So I think I'm going to try and put her down and hope she's not yelling. She decided she's going to cooperate and sit on the chairs. So hopefully we can get through this without any more yelling. But that was Blood and Iron by Katja. I did really enjoy this, but a little mixed because it was just so cram-packed with information that I don't feel I got everything I could have or really connected with it as much as I would have liked to. Anyway, so I am reading currently The Queen of Poisons by Robert Thorogood, Marlowe Murder Club mystery, and Democracy Awakening by Heather Cox Richardson, a nonfiction. So those are what I'm actively working on. In watching stuff, I mostly kind of watched a lot of trash, which we'll get to, but I was not in the brain space to really consume anything that required thinking. So I didn't. I watched a lot of Love Island, old Love Island, in fact, very, very old Love Island. I did finish one movie though, and that was The Lady in the Van. This was so good. This will probably be like my favorite movie of the year. I loved it so much. It is based on a memoir by Alan Bennett, who wrote Uncommon Reader, very famous, like everyone on BookTube knows and loves The Uncommon Reader. And he was also a playwright, but this is a memoir, a condensed, focused on his experience with a woman who lived in a van in his driveway for 15 years. And she is played by Maggie Smith, Dame Maggie Smith. And she is so amazing. She's so good in this role. She's so funny. She's so witty. She is abrasive. They both are abrasive. I think that's what makes this work, is both of them are so like butting heads and abrasive while also really like caring and supporting each other in ways that they kind of do grudgingly. I can't remember, I forgot to grab the actor's name who played Alan Bennett, but he was fantastic as well. And so I'll make sure I put that somewhere here. But it's almost entirely just the two of them interacting for the most part. There are a lot of cameos from big names otherwise, and it's a fairly recent picture. I think it was 2015. But it's so wonderful because you see them enter into this grudging relationship, and he lets her come in and use his bathroom all the time, even though he's really grossed out by her because she's not clean. She's been living in this van. She's elderly. She's often not doing well mentally or physically, and yet they find their way to coexisting together. And he increasingly is learning more about who this person that she is, and that she really is a special person in all of the mundanity that he sees as this kind of garbage person. Like he really is looking at her as a flawed failure of a person because she's living in a van outside his house as a squatter, and yet there is so much more to her. So he's uncovering who she is and her past and history, even though she doesn't really want to share that. And it's charming. It's so wonderful to watch them sort of grow and continue to support each other over those years, the more than decade that she was living there, and see them form this relationship where there is a reliance and a care, even in the weird situation that they're in. But oh man, the tone, the wit, the humor that Bennett brings across in this story is really interesting because it's a memoir, but yet like it has his sort of fictionalization, and he makes that very apparent here, or the filmmakers make it very apparent, because we have moments where he's actually talking to a second version of himself and they're having conversations, or he's calling himself out on things that he has inserted that he wishes happened a certain way, but they really didn't happen that way. And so that was really an intriguing way of handling this and making it even more humorous. But Bennett just has such a wit and humor to him in his writing that now I really want to go read this, because this was an actual published memoir that they adapted into the film. And it's so great. So highly recommend. You must check out The Lady in the Van if you have a chance. So that is what I watched this week. And as I said, it was a tough brain week for me, mainly because I'm pretty sure I mentioned last week that I had a spider bite, and that really just snowballed and got way worse. It was pretty much just a standard spider bite at that point, and then got significantly worse and affected my whole foot. And that was a nightmare and was really just very uncomfortable and not allowing me to do a whole lot. I ended up getting some medicine, and that made it even worse because I was just feeling so weird and like not really feeling in my brain or my body all week or most of the week. And then I sort of started feeling better, and then I felt worse again. It was just a real struggle this past week. But I also had a lot of things going on as well that fortunately didn't really require much of me until things actually started getting better. We also had crazy weather. So I think Monday and Tuesday, we were under constant tornado warnings, and we had tornado sirens going off a whole lot. And that was just ridiculous. And then after that, I think Wednesday, Thursday onward, we've had gorgeous weather. We've had the most beautiful, perfect spring, sunshine, gorgeous weather for the past several days. So that I think has turned me around a little bit too. But it was real weird. It was real weird. And very, very stressful. I had my first foster that you previously had seen, Sasha, during that time while it was bad weather. And so I kept having to load her into her carrier and take her downstairs and get my cats downstairs as well into the basement because of the tornado sirens. Or a couple times I just shut them in closets because that was where they wanted to be. So you don't want to extra stress them out. So dealing with that. And then Thursday, I was swapping her out because she was doing much better and was ready to go get her surgery so she can be available for adoption. And they had a couple other cats that were having digestive issues as well. And so now I have another one, Isabella, who you have just seen, who is so sweet and so friendly. I think she probably has separation anxiety, it seems like. She's very clingy. So I think that's probably what is going on, that she's just stressed out about that. But we will see. I have only had her a couple of days. So once she gets calmed down, hopefully, then she will be available to go back to the shelter as well. But we're troubleshooting and figuring out what's going on with her. So that was chaos in my week, basically. So I think that's all for this week. So I'm going to leave you with 2 recommendations. I have one that is from Alyssa, aka Nerdy Nurse Reads, who's doing a deep dive on the Brontes, and I just talked about Jane Eyre, and Alyssa just talked about Jane Eyre in a very deep dive video, so I'm going to link that one. And then Liminal Spaces also did a single book review of Piranesi, and that was interesting because it feels exactly like the type of book that Liminal Spaces reads and reviews, weird stuff specifically, but it's not their sort of normal thing, because a lot of what they read is like old school cosmic horror and like pulpy mass market paperbacks, and this is not that. Piranesi is Susanna Clarke's most recent book that's gained widespread popularity and was, this real genre crossing book that appealed to literary fiction readers, genre readers across the board. And I loved the insights that were brought in from Liminal Spaces because they are such a different type of reader than a lot of the people that were heralding it award-wise before. So I very much enjoyed that discussion of Piranesi. So anyway, I think with that, we will wind down for today. And I will say, I hope you have a wonderful week in reading and in life. And thank you so very much for watching.